There you are! Welcome, welcome one and all to the next scintillating instalment of our series Tarot to the Nines. Not, however, the instalment that I thought this was going to be, because I was about to start filming, or at least I was about to start writing the notes for my next number in the sequence of numbers that we've been working through, which is of course the very exciting number 8. However, I realised I couldn't go on to number 8 because we've got some catching up to do, and the catching up we have to do is with the equally exciting and equally alliterative Enneagram. Because since my last Enneagram video, which was on the Heart Triad, types 2, 3 and 4, we have covered another 3 numbers in the sequence of Tarot to the Nines. We have covered the numbers 5, 6 and 7, which means that we have covered the numbers for the Enneagram Head Triad. So before we go on to number 8, I am going to do probably a rather short video on the Head Triad. What's the Head Triad, Brian, I hear you ask? Well, you may recall from my last video, and incidentally, if you're watching this and thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Enneagram, what has that got to do with tarot? You need to look at, well, I invite you to look at one or both of 2 of my previous videos, because in those videos I give a bit of background to the Enneagram. So if you look at the first video in the series, Tarot to the Nines, the introductory video, I say a bit about the Enneagram in that. But then I say a bit more, and probably in a bit more detail, about the Enneagram in the introduction of my video to the Heart Triad, which is the last Enneagram video I did. To make things easy for you, I'm going to put the link for both of those below, and I encourage you to watch at least part of those if you want to have a bit of background on the Enneagram, because I'm not going to go into that in this video, because if I did, it would just be repeating myself. So, we are talking about the Head Triad. I will tell you, or remind you, oh, let me just turn the light down so you can see what I'm reminding you of. Here is an Enneagram, a picture of the Enneagram. I haven't written the names of the types on because you're going to discover what they are shortly. But the Enneagram has 9 types. In the last video we did the Heart Triad, which is 3 types. You see it's split into 3, and each of these segments is a triad of the Enneagram. So we did the 2, 3 and the 4, which is the Heart Triad. The clue is in the little heart that I have drawn there. And today we're going to be looking at the 5 and the 6 and the 7, which are in the Head Triad. That's not a brain, by the way, that is a thinking cloud. And then, in the future, once we've done numbers 8 and 9, can you believe we're nearly up to number 9? It's just, I cannot quite believe that we have nearly completed the numbers for Tarot to the Nines. Anyway, we're not there yet, so bear with me. Once I've done number 9, we'll then do the Gut Triad, and again that's not a gut, but that's an instinctive spark that we're seeing there, illustrated by that sparky thing. And those are the numbers 8, 9 and 1. So there's the Enneagram, those are the 3 triads, and today we are looking at the Head Triad, which includes the numbers 5, 6 and 7. Now incidentally, it's kind of interesting for me to do this because I think I've mentioned before that I am actually about to start a year-long course of study on the Enneagram. So this is very exciting because obviously I've taught myself quite a bit about the Enneagram, and I've observed others who teach the Enneagram, and I've learned by observing people who have already typed themselves and so on. But this is a proper bona fide Enneagram course, which is running not very far from here, which is very convenient. And yes, so it's going to teach me how to actually properly type people with the Enneagram. One of the things that you have to do, of course, if you're going to be doing that kind of thing, is type yourself. And that's kind of interesting for me because I, up until now, or at least for the last little while, I have been feeling as though, and I've mentioned this before, I'm sure, that I am a number 9, which is in the Instinctive Triad, and we'll get to that soon. But I had an interview, I've actually been doubting that a little bit recently, and I had an interview with one of the course instructors for this course that I'm going to go on, who does type people professionally, and that was very instructive because it kind of confirmed, my conversation with her kind of confirmed what I was beginning to come around to thinking myself, and that is that I probably am not a 9. I'm more likely to be part of the Head Triad, and At the moment, it seems to be between a 5 and a 6. In our conversation, it looked like maybe a bit more of a 6, but I actually think through my own investigations, it's maybe a bit more of a 5. But I don't know for sure yet. And that's the thing about the Enneagram. It's not one of these things where you can just be typed and that's it. It involves quite a lot of observation. It means observing the way you relate to the world. It means observing the way you respond to the world and to your circumstances when you are feeling secure, and to the way that you respond to the world when you're feeling under stress. How you act when you're self-aware, and how you act when you're clouded with judgment. Your judgment is clouded with perhaps judgments, false judgments. And that's what I think is so fascinating about the Enneagram. It does encourage us to really examine ourselves, but not just in a kind of, oh yes, I've got these traits, that means I'm such and such a type, but in a rather deep way, and in a way that then can be used to help us understand how to work more effectively in our lives, which is what it's all about. So today we are talking about the head types, the head triad types, which are the 5, 6 and 7. And I've done again what I did before in the heart triad video. I've given the name of the types because that's helpful, because then we know what we're talking about. I've given a list of some of the qualities of each of the types. Then I have written something about how they act when they are unaware and how they act when they are aware. How they act when they're under stress, which type they go to. So each of the types, when it's under stress or security, has a tendency to move towards another type in terms of the way that it expresses itself. So we learn a bit about which of the types are that each of these moves towards when they're in stress or security. It's one of the reasons actually that typing yourself can be quite challenging, because what you might pick up on first is not so much your core type, which I think of as the kind of the resting place, the station that you exist in, and then you get to move along the track, the different ones. And you might identify yourself to start with one of the ones that you are moving towards. Then, once we've done all of that, I've also made a list of some of the things that each of the types can do to help themselves when they're feeling like they need some help to be more effective in their lives. So that's what we're going to do, and then once we've done that, I'm going to rub out some of this and I'm going to put the tarot constellations for each of those up, and we'll talk a little bit about how they may or may not relate to the tarot constellations. My feeling, and this has been kind of developing for me as I've been doing this series, is that it is possible to draw comparisons between the Enneagram types and their equivalent numbered constellation, but it's not quite as simple as saying that they are the same, as you'll see in a second, because for example, one of the qualities of the investigator and the observer is to be private, withdrawing, cerebral, introspective, a bit like the hermit. So the hermit's not number 5, the hierophant's number 5. So I think although it's possible to draw comparisons, what I have found is that some of the tarot cards actually, some of the archetypes of the tarot cards relate to other number clusters. But we'll get onto that in a second. So let's just have a quick canter through the head types. So the head triad, as the name suggests, these are people who generally, in the way that they interact with the world, relate to the world cerebrally. So they come from their if you like, their world view is a world view that comes from the head. It doesn't mean that they don't ever come from the heart or from the gut. It doesn't mean that they can't work instinctively or respond instinctively. It certainly doesn't mean that they're not compassionate, etc. It just means that their natural proclivity is to come from the head. It's one of the reasons I think possibly I actually am a head triad type, because I certainly am a thinker and sometimes a worrier and a kind of niggler, in terms of my brain can niggle on something for quite a long time. But that is a whole other video probably. So number 5. So number 5 is, depending on which Enneagram teacher you're talking to, is known as the investigator. And I'm going to have to just do this with a different colour, because I realise I've taken the I out of investigator, which is highly ironic considering I think I might be a number 5. Anyway, the investigator or the observer. And in terms of quality, or qualities. These people tend to be private. They tend to be quite cerebral. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're cleverer than other types, although sometimes that can be the case. It just means that they spend a lot of time up here, a lot of time in their heads. They can be creative when they're at their best. They can certainly be creative, but they're also quite withdrawing. So quite a lot of introverts will find themselves in the 5 category. And in fact, when they are unaware and they are not very kind of tuned into their proclivities, there is a risk that they become overly withdrawn. They can become quite isolated. They can also become quite critical of themselves and others. But when they're aware, that introspection allows them to be rather sensitive and dedicated to people. So they because they're a head type, they actually do borrow some of the qualities from neighbours, especially the number 6. So if you're a 5, you will have a 6 wing. Remember, if I can just show you as a little reminder, each of the types has 2 types on either side of it, and those are its wings. And some Enneagram teachers will say that you actually have both of those wings and can borrow from both of them. So if you're a 1, you've got a bit of an 8 in you, and you've got a bit of a 2 in you. That's not what I'm pointing at. If you're a 7, you've got a bit of an 8 in you, and you've got a bit of a 6 in you. And if you are a 1, which is over here, I'm doing this back to front, which is confusing the hell out of me. It's because I'm probably a 5. If you're a 1, you've got a bit of a 9 in you and a bit of a 2 in you. But some Enneagram teachers would say you have both of those. Some would say you are more likely to have a very, very developed one of them. Anyway, there is a potential that the 5 will have elements of the 6 in it. And therefore sensitive, dedicated, loyal. If a 5 is on your side, then you've got a friend for life, kind of thing. When they're under stress, they move to number 7. And again, moving to means going along one of the lines. So let's just see if I can do this back front. So there, oh no, that's a 5. So there's a 5, and the 5 can either go to the number 7 or it can go to the number 8, because it's joined to those, you see in the diagram. And under stress it goes to the 7, and under security it goes to the 8. So when it's stressed, there's a risk that the 5 will take up some of the more negative qualities of the 7 and will become a bit scattered. Although, just because it's stressed doesn't mean that it always has to be negative qualities. It just means that when under stress, a 5 is likely to become more like a 7. So it can include positive qualities of the 7 as well. But the risk there is under stress, a 5, which is generally kind of a bit more withdrawn and observing, actually gets kind of scattered. And it's one of the reasons 5s need to withdraw, to recalibrate. Under security, a 5 can move a bit more towards the number 8 and become actually quite assertive, even though they are a more withdrawn type. So it's not unusual to find 5s in positions of leadership. They will tend to be probably more of the kind of quiet type of leader and the more introspective type of leader. In terms of doing better and actually becoming healthier as a 5, let me just move over here because it's easier for you to see. The thing for a 5 to do is get out of its head, so becoming more physical. Let's get physical, as Olivia Newton-John said. Will draw a 5 away from its head and will allow it to experience the grounding of the real world. Group sharing, which encourages a 5 to come out of itself, is also healthy, or can be. It's also good for a 5 to observe sensations and to become aware of the sensate world, rather than, again, being stuck up here all the time. And sometimes a 5 needs to just drop the control. So 5s will, because of their withdrawing characteristic, will like to be in control of things, and it can be healthy for them to learn to drop the control and let things flow. So that is the number 5. Number 6, the loyalist and questioner. So these types actually are, although they may not like to admit it, are actually quite driven by fear. So they can be fearful, they can be doubting, they can have difficult relationships with authority. Either they can really defer to authority, or they might kick back against authority, so they can become rebellious. But when they're committed, they're very committed. So they have got, again, that kind of loyalty element, which, you know, you could see it in a bit in the 5, is really coming out in the 6, hence the name loyalist. When they're unaware, and they are in a difficult kind of frame of mind, they can become paranoid and inflexible. But when they are self-aware and they are owning themselves, then they can be extremely productive and indeed protective of those that they love. Under stress, they're likely to move towards the 3, and they can become very hard-working. That can be positive in the sense that it means they can get a lot of things done, but it can also be quite negative in the sense that they can burn themselves out. So that's something to watch for. When they are secure, they move toward being a 9. And the thing that's interesting there is that the 6s are questioners. So they question things. They want to know why. Why does the world work in the way that it does? And anything that they learn about the world, they will want to know what the why behind that is. When they are feeling very secure and okay, they will move more towards a 9, so they are more likely to become a bit Zen-like and accepting, and that can be a very good thing. It can go too far and can lead to a kind of an apathy, so something to watch for. So the lessons and the tips for number 6 is learn to enjoy success. You know, it doesn't mean that they have to constantly be questioning everything. Just enjoy success for what it is. Practice trust. 6s have a tendency to imagine all the terrible things that can happen to them and to other people and to the world and to their work, etc., etc. So practicing trust and a bit of faith is a good thing for a 6. And going alongside that, learn to reality check using the imagination. So what a 6 will do is it will think about the worst thing that can happen. So 2 things you can do there. One is you can think about the best thing that would happen and give it at least equal weighting to the worst. The other thing you can do as a 6 is you can actually imagine things through to their absolutely worst conclusion, almost to the point of ridiculousness, as a way of diffusing some of that stressful energy that you might invest in that vision. And learn to relax. You don't have anything to prove. You don't have to prove anything. You're just who you are. Relax and be a happy 6. That's the number 6. And then the number 5. The number 5 is called the epicure, or the enthusiast, or the epicure. These are people who love life. They enjoy things. They are optimistic. They're energetic. They can be very charming. They can be a bit elusive because all of that charm and enthusiasm and so on can act as a bit of a facade. So it can be a bit difficult to get to know a 7 because they're just so happy all the time. And it's not happy as in terms of just being happy for the sake of it. It comes across as a genuine enthusiasm for knowing about the world and understanding things and enjoying the pleasures of life. When they are, I see deliberate, except not deliberate mistake. That should be a plus rather than a minus. When they are unaware, they're in a state of unawareness, they can become selfish and hypocritical, because all that pleasure, all that kind of enjoyment can mean that they spend more time thinking about their own pleasure than other people's comfort. So they can become selfish and hypocritical, but when they are aware of themselves and when they are acting in a healthy way, they can be very perceptive, they can be very generous, they can share some of that joy with others. When they are under stress, they're likely to become a bit more like a 1, and that means they can be a bit irritable and overly perfectionistic and critical. When they are secure, they can move toward being like a 5. So they move within the head triad, just like under stress, a 5 becomes more like a 7. Under security, a 7 becomes more like a 5. And that means that they can become a bit more withdrawing. That can be a good thing because it can take them out of that constant must find the next pleasurable thing mode. But the downside of that is it can also tip over into the more negative aspects of 5 and that kind of isolationist quality. So in order to be a healthy number 7, mindfulness meditation, learning to relax and just be is a good thing for a 7 to do and to just be without any requirements being placed on the way of things. Just allow things to be as they are and to be content with that. Also, don't run away from pain. So a 7, because it's about enjoyment and pleasure and the good things in life, can sometimes shut pain off or ignore pain or look away from pain. But pain is part of the picture. You know, we've talked a lot in this series about duality and non-duality, and the idea that, you know, the moment you have an up, you have a down, because the moment something is created, its opposite is, automatically created, even if it's just mentally, because the concept of something invites the mind to create the opposite concept. So don't run away from pain as though it's not there. Also, a good thing to do is to learn to go deep instead of broad. So a 7 can become rather scattered. So a 5, when it's under stress, becomes like a 7 and becomes scattered. A 7 can become scattered in trying to do all the kind of pleasurable things. All the things. It wants to do all the things, and actually sometimes it needs to go deep instead of broad. So, you know, allow yourself to rest in an interest for a while. And also learn not to just accept propaganda at face value. So if you hear something about yourself that is very critical or very complimentary, those are valid pieces of feedback and it's worth considering them, but be prepared to focus on the facts. So don't allow yourself to get carried away with just what you're told, because that can be one of the pitfalls of a 7, who they want to be liked. So focus on the facts, whether they're critical or complimentary. So that is a very quick canter through the qualities and the pluses and the minuses and the stresses and securities of the numbers. And now I'm going to clear some space on the board, and we are going to quickly look at the numbers and their, I was going to say related, but maybe related tarot constellations. So here we are with an analysis of the cards in relation to the types in the Head Triad of the Enneagram. And again, I'm going to be working from this very fascinating book, The Fool's Excellent Adventure, A Hero's Journey Through the Enneagram and Tarot by Susan Rhodes. And what this book does is it links, as I've said before, it links each of the Enneagram types to a different tarot constellation and type on the type in the tarot. So the types that we're looking at today, types 5, 6 and 7, relates to the path of the Hierophant, the path of the Lovers, and of course the path of the Chariot or the Charioteer. And in fact, Susan Rhodes has given each of these paths, in terms of their Enneagram relevance, a different name: Path of Wisdom for number 5, Path of Trust for number 6, and Path of Liberation for number 7. And I think it's probably worth saying that initially I've got some observations on this. You know, as I've said, it's up for debate, I think, whether the Enneagram types and the tarot constellations match terribly neatly. This book, I have to say, does mount a compelling case, but I think when you actually just look at the Enneagram literature, then it's harder to see how some of the types relate to different tarot types. But there are some interesting things to observe. So if we're talking about investigators and observers, it's quite interesting that the Hierophant represents this kind of keeper of knowledge, if you like, or gateway, a human gateway to knowledge. Somebody who's a loyalist and a questioner. You know, the path of trust would make sense. You know, possibly that's what they need to learn, and certainly the contrast between this kind of divine love and this devilish kind of supernatural overview is kind of interesting in terms of the contrast, and certainly in terms of path of liberation. Talk about the Tower. The Tower, if you want liberation, if you want freedom, if you want to be blasted out of your comfort zone, the Tower is your card. And you know, the Chariot is not a card that I would necessarily associate particularly with enthusiasm or that kind of energetic kind of perspective. So it'll be interesting to see what he had to say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you just a couple of quotes for each of those, and then you can of course do your own research and make up your own mind. So looking at the path of wisdom, type 5, what it says here is that the qualities of the Hierophant mesh well with the qualities of the 5s on the Enneagram. For 5s are the type most associated with scholarly, academic knowledge. They're the ones who are often found as teachers of advanced concepts requiring highly abstract or metaphysical knowledge. While this knowledge may be impressive, it is often solely theoretical, divorced from either emotion or practical application. And I'm kind of smiling here because I mentioned in the earlier segment of this video that I'm beginning to think I might be a 5, and certainly some of the things I know about and can talk about, just, you know, in terms of practicality, you know, I can talk about non-duality, but I can't wire a plug. Anyway, where did I get to? While this knowledge may be impressive, it is often solely theoretical. Yeah, did that. Enneagrammatically, that is a good word. Enneagrammatically, the challenge for 5s is to integrate their intellect with the wisdom grounded in their emotions and body. If they cannot or will not do so, then their intellectual discoveries, which start out fresh and original, can turn into dogma, especially once they reach a position of authority. So they really can turn into the Pope, at least in their own mind. This is why it's so important for 5s to learn how to translate book knowledge into something more vital and life-giving. And then it goes on to say that the temperance key represents the process by which an Enneagram 5 experiences the decompartmentalization of his once separated mental, emotional and physical selves. The fact that the active figure here is an archangel, I can never say that word, archangel, I want to say archangel, archangel, tells us that the action is not being performed by the 5 himself, but by greater forces within his being. Forces outside his conscious control. So from his perspective, something is being done to him. His role is to try to cooperate with the process. And there's a bit more about the temperance key there. I'm not going to read all of it, obviously. So that's the type 5. So now we've got the type 6, Path of Trust, or to give it its full title from this book, Path of Trust in the Goodness of Life. So here's somebody who questions everything, but are they questioning everything to the point where they actually can't enjoy it, perhaps? So what Susan Rhodes says here is that Enneagram 6s are instinctively drawn to activities and organisations that create stable bonds between people. They have a natural service ethic and a respect for others which helps them bring together diverse individuals under a single banner. They are the natural guardians of culture and who are sensitive to the potentially disastrous consequences of cultural disruption, anarchy, revolution, etc. As a result, they are often attracted to activities that support the larger community, as police officers, firefighters, and community volunteers. They are often willing to sacrifice individual rewards or recognition for the sake of their community values, however they define these values, and are loyal and steadfast in their commitments. And then it talks about being the possibility of being too loyal and steadfast and becoming distrustful. From a six-ish point of view, if Adam and Eve had simply disobeyed... No, sorry. Let me start again. From a six-ish point of view, if Adam and Eve had simply obeyed God's command not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we might still be in the Garden of Eden. So there we are. Blame the sixes. And then it goes on to say the devil, the key is relevant here. The problem of fear is familiar turf for most sixes. Remember I said they were driven by fear? Because they are the type most obviously prone to worry and anxiety. Many are extremely sensitive to energy and pick up on psychic impressions very easily, so they are all too aware of the subconscious. What they are typically less aware of is how to work intelligently with it, allowing their dreams, visions, or other experiences to illuminate their inner world. In the absence of understanding, they may see such experiences as either signs of mental illness or demonic possession. So very interesting. And then we have finally the number 7, which is the Path of Liberation. And what we have here from the kind of Enneagram point of view is 7s on the Enneagram are very like the charioteer, young, excited and raring to go. Even older 7s seem youngish. They have a spirit of youth that Jung expressed as the archetype of the puer, eternus, the eternal youth. They see the world as their playground and are usually avid travellers that enjoy learning about diverse cultures. So there's a kind of travel element. 7s especially value their freedom, the ability to be footloose and fancy-free. They're quick to adapt to changing circumstances and can usually blend into whatever environment they encounter in their travels. Because the charioteer is male, we see the feminine quality reflected in key 7 in the charioteer's face and golden locks. The moons on his epaulets and the prominent breasts on the Sphinx, all of which are related to the moon, the chariot's planetary ruler. So there's a mix of male and female in there. Then it's kind of saying the biggest problem for 7s is often too much of a good thing. They are blessed with so many talents and interests, they can easily become overwhelmed by the task of trying to get them under control. That's that scattered energy I mentioned. And then the tower, it says here, 7s often attract tower experiences because of their amazing tendency to glide through situations that would easily sink another type. Given the chance, the mentally agile 7 will think up some way to escape his problems, often using guile, cleverness, or even trickery. He's the perfect trickster hero, like the one we see in the Rider-Waite-Smith 7 of Swords. Remember, that's part of this constellation. The only problem is that he sometimes is too clever for his own good. If he only wants the fun experience of the hero's journey rather than the hard ones that have the power to change him, then tower experiences give him a challenge that even he can't escape. But then it goes on to talk about the tower also being a kind of a means of achieving that eureka moment, that lightning flash of inspiration which we see on the cards. So those are the observations from this book on those types and how they relate to the tarot constellations. So if one of these is one of your constellations, then I invite you to consider what you've heard in this video. Look back to the number in relation to the tarot constellation that I did earlier, because I've done videos on each of these numbers now. And you can really go quite deeply into this and learn either from the perspective of your Enneagram type, if that's what you know, or you can go into it via that, or you can go into it via your tarot constellation type. Just be aware that they are different systems. They are different systems. This book is weaving the systems together in a very compelling way. It's the only book actually I've been able to find that does this, and therefore I think there's still some room for debate and discussion about this. But it is a fascinating book, and I think that some of the observations she makes are really, really enriching. And if you're interested at all in your tarot constellation or your Enneagram type, then either way, this book is going to be a good read. And I am going to do a video fairly soon, which will look at some of the resources that underpin the series that I've been making. Books and decks and other resources that you can tap into if you want to learn more about any of this stuff. And I hope you do, because it's very, very interesting. So that is my video on the head triad of the Enneagram. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, then please give it a like, and if you want to know more about what we're doing here on my YouTube channel, then please subscribe. If you click the bell icon, then you'll get a notification when a new video appears. And a new video is going to appear pretty soon, because my plan is now to have a sip of my Campari soda, which is waiting over there for me. And then I'm going to have my dinner, and as I dine, I'm going to make notes for my next video. And that video will be the eternally entwining, very excellent number 8. See you then.